Welcome to the Learning Can't Wait podcast, a Full Mind production. At Full Mind, our vision is to ensure every child has access to an exceptional education. Each episode, we will be joined by pathfinders within and around the education space who are bringing about transformational change on behalf of deserving students. I am your host, Hayley Spira-Bauer. Welcome back, everybody, to the Learning Can't Wait podcast. I am amazed I was able to get the next guest for this episode in one place, as his busy travel schedule has been very busy. If you follow him, you'll know what I mean in just a second. We have the incredible Dan Fitzpatrick, the education strategist and author of the recent bestseller, Infinite Education. Welcome, Dan.
Thank you so much for having me. It's amazing to be with you. And yeah, I've been looking forward to chatting with you for a while now. So hopefully we can have a great conversation.
I'm really eager to talk to you as well, not just because your book is receiving a ton of buzz for its vision of education and the crossover between AI and education, but also because you really are considered one of the world's foremost experts on this very topic. And as we talk about the global influence of artificial intelligence development, I want to hear not just the United States perspective, but one for the whole world. And who better to do that than you?
Yeah, yeah. As you can probably tell from my accent, I'm from the northeast of England, which is where I am now. So as you can see, if as you can see, the listeners probably won't be able to see, but it's dark outside. So it's late at night here. So and I'm really privileged. I get to travel around the UK, Europe, around the United States, and Latin America as well, which is really cool. And so it's all going great. And like you said, the book seems to be going down well, which is all I can hope for, really, because I suppose when you put out ideas, when you're kind of alone at your laptop writing away, you don't know you don't know how it's going to be received, I guess. So it's always a bit nerve-wracking, but thankfully, people are getting it at least. So
That seems very
hopefully they
true.
enjoy it. Yeah.
Well, let's do this. Let's jump into you and your vision and how we got here. And then we'll talk a little bit about the book. So, Dan, how did you come to be the professional and personal version of yourself?
Yeah, I mean it's taken a while. I'm 38. 30, I keep wanting to say 39, but I'm 38. So I yeah, I had lots of different jobs when I was younger. Lots of at one point I was a stand-up comedian, did that for a few years, and kind of I was always, it took me a while to figure out really what I wanted to do, and I suppose I still don't fully know, if I'm honest. But I I always had a passion for kind of wanting to see if there was something more, like wanting to see what was, how can we improve things, how can we do things better, no matter kind of what field I was in. I always kind of pushed for that. And yeah, my late 20s, I trained to be a teacher, a high school teacher, in a place called Manchester in the north of England, and then moved back to Newcastle, where I'm from. Got into leadership within education. I was always fascinated by ed tech, educational technology. It always blew my mind what was available out there, but how little of it was being used, especially in the UK. I feel like the United States has always been a bit ahead of us, but in the UK, our education is very traditional, and we had all of these tools at our fingertips, but nobody really knew how to use them and how to make the most of them. So I always kind of had a passion for wanting to share these with fellow educators, and try and change the learning experience for our young people. And yeah, so I got very into artificial intelligence, educational technology, and then moved into leadership within college education. It was high school education in the UK, as it is in the United States, is don't have there's not enough budget really to really take things that far. So as somebody who was passionate and wanted to lead strategy and change in education, it made sense for me at a certain point to move to college education where there was more scope to kind of to make an impact. So yeah, so I spent some time in industries actually. I was writing an innovation strategy, a 5-year innovation strategy for the college. Spent a lot of time in local industries, and that's when I first came across a tool that was first described to me as like a calculator for words. And this really fascinated me because I was like, well, we this could be really helpful for our teachers, just on the most basic level of helping them save a bit of time. And so we started to play around with early versions of this, and then in November 2022, a company called OpenAI released ChatGPT, which was like the tools we'd been playing with, but a lot more advanced and kind of, I suppose, the capabilities that I thought might be way down the line, 5, 10 years down the line, were suddenly at our fingertips, and suddenly realized that this could be another moment where education needs to kind of grapple with something new. And I knew from my own experience that education was never particularly good at that, and always took innovation and tried to fit it in with how to support what they were already doing, not take innovation and look at, well, how do we improve what we're doing necessarily. So I recognized that AI was actually going to be probably one of the most disruptive things to happen to education for a long time, if not forever, really. So kind of set out on this journey, really started helping other schools, other educators, businesses around the world, and how to kind of use AI to rethink education, I guess. And I always joke, I kind of AI is kind of like the Trojan horse into schools. So I get invited in to talk about AI but actually once I'm in there, I think the main message is more the kind of transformational piece of, well, how do we improve education going forward. So yeah, it's been a crazy few years, as anyone who works in AI can probably attest to. But yeah, I wouldn't want to be doing anything else at the moment. And like you said and pointed out, my new book, Infinite Education, has just come out. And it's kind of geared towards the strategic side of things.
That is so interesting how you landed in this particular phase of your journey, which I know the journey is still going, but it is really fascinating to hear you speak about your nascent introduction to AI and then the rapid acceleration of basically its possibilities due to the introduction of ChatGPT. Can you talk a little bit about, if you can remember back, before OpenAI released ChatGPT, where did you think this was going in, as you said, 5 to 10 years?
Yeah, I kind of thought, I mean, I don't fully know. It's always like a bit when you're trying to think back how you would think it's kind of uh it's trying to it's trying to piece it together. And I guess I think I thought maybe where we were at on the launch of OpenAI, ChatGPT, that was probably going to be like maybe 10 years down the line, and didn't quite envisage it being as smooth as it is, and the kind of the how the back and forth with a tool like ChatGPT, for example, how easy that would be. So, um, yeah, I think even before when we first started looking at it, I was just kind of thinking, if it could pick out kind of keywords, like if it could pick out the essence of how certain key terminology had been used within an essay or a piece of work like that, and then could give an indication to the lecturer or to the teacher of of some metrics of the writing, that would be amazing. And that's what we were kind of looking at the time. But yeah, I suppose what we got in the end was blew my mind.
Right.
Absolutely.
You know, I've talked to a few different technologists who say, they were using AI before OpenAI gained
Yeah.
popularity. And yet, the proliferation and pace that we're seeing right now, particularly over the past like year and a half,
Mhm.
2 years, is well beyond expectation. So obviously, no one was fully anticipating, maybe beside the engineers over at OpenAI, what was to come. And now we're living in a world in which, as I said, it's rapidly changing. So let's talk about, amidst this rapid change, you still have a blueprint for the future of what it can and should be, which is what you've laid out in your book, Infinite Education. For those that haven't read it yet, can you talk us through what is that vision you've laid out, and why do you think people are resonating with it?
Well, I think what I tried to do in the book is I'd be really, I'm really clear that I think we kind of misunderstand strategy a lot. And I think what we think of as strategy usually is a plan. So I think it's very, we see a lot of resources out there where it's like, right, the strategic approach to whatever it is, might be AI, and it's like, right, well, first of all, you need to speak to the parents, bring the community, and then you need to do some AI literacy within the school. You need to make sure that your IT department have security in place. And it's all really good stuff. I'm not saying this isn't good. This is, of course, it's good and it needs to happen. But I think that's almost after the strategy. That's the plan that flows from a strategy. So what I try to do in the book is I try to step back from that and say, right, well, kind of even before we get into that. So there's this, and I probably detracting people away from the book by saying this, but when you get the book, it's not going to be like a step-by-step process of what you should do to change your school. That's because I think that's impossible, and for the reason that we don't know what this technology is going to be like in 6 months, never mind 5 years. So I think, and I see it a lot, and I kind of know why people do it, but it kind of infuriates me sometimes. And that is, I think
Let it out.
thinking
Let
that,
it out. Here we go.
but I think just thinking we know everything about how this is going to unfold, just based off what we've got access to right now, and I think that's really dangerous because that is changing at such a fast pace, and there's so much happening behind the scenes that I don't think we realize like the advanced robotics that's happening right now. Like it's predicted that within 5 years, many of us are going to have like humanoid robots living with us, and that we can have an intellectual conversation with that can do chores around the house. These exist. This is not like a sci-fi prediction. You go onto YouTube and look up the Tesla Optimus or the Figure 2. They're already working in factories. The Figure 2 is already working in a BMW factory. The Optimus is already working in Tesla factories. Um, then you go over to like the medical side or the more invasive side in terms of the how places are linking AI with medical treatment, with reading brain signals, and it starts to get really crazy. So just thinking AI is like ChatGPT or as like an educational platform, and that's it, is really kind of scratching the surface. So what I do is I try to give people the tools in this book that lets them continue to innovate. And for me, strategy is innovation because strategy is like my definition for strategy, which I kind of got from a guy called Vijay Govindarajan, who's a business strategist who I studied under at when I did a postgraduate diploma at MIT, and he pretty much says that strategy is leadership in the future. It's all about how do we ensure that we are leading tomorrow, 5 years, 10 years down the line, and you've got to act now to be able to do that. So the strategy is kind of, and I use the analogy, and I started using this analogy a while ago and realized nobody knew what it meant. And I think it might just be something like my dad said to me when I was younger, which I thought everybody knew, but they don't. But I mean, my dad used to say to me when I was younger, if you come up against a challenge, like if you come up, let's say you come up against a wall and you need to climb over it and it's too high, you throw your hat over it. So you take your hat off, you throw your hat over it. Then you've got no choice but to find a way over the wall. So for me, strategy is about throwing your hat over the wall. Then you figure out how to get over it. Whereas kind of going back to what we were saying before, I think we've confused strategy with how you get over the wall. I think strategy is the throwing of the hat over the wall, and then you figure out how to get over it. So the book is essentially how do you, within an organization like a school, like a college, like a university, um, that are very entrenched in tradition, are very entrenched in in inverted commas an orthodox approach that's been done a certain way for so long. How do we begin to envisage, I suppose, how far we can throw our hat over that wall, I think, to take the analogy even further. So and 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 continue to do that, because after we get over that wall, there'll be another wall, and then there'll be another wall. So how do we have the skills and the know-how to be organizations that can continue to do this, and can and that takes a multifaceted approach. One of them being the type of people we have at our schools, the type of the experience, the expertise we have, or the vision that we have. And I kind of make the argument as well that within schools we've always kind of prioritized the managerial type of leader. So someone who can come in, take it over, keep it ticking over, maybe incrementally improve it over time, and then pass it on to another leader, and so on. It's a managerial style of leadership, whereas actually there's a whole spectrum of types of leaders. And I argue that we need, and I take these styles of leaders from a framework called liberating structures, which is a great kind of builds on design thinking, and it's about uh, making change in organizations. Um, and after we have managerial leadership, which kind of happens within maturity of an organization, then we need to continue the cycle and move into what it calls creative destruction. So we have to then start to not recklessly, and we need to do it with empathy, compassion, but we need to start unpicking. We need to start deconstructing where we're at, and that type of manager, sorry, that type of leader. We need what's called a heretical leader, a leader who's going to say, actually, is there another way here? Is what we've got all there is, or is there more here? Can we unpick this and try and figure it out? And then it goes to leaders who are connectors, because once you've passed that point, you then need leaders who can bring ideas together, bring people together, and then it goes into an entrepreneurial style leader who can then build something, and then it goes back to maturity. But the idea is that you keep moving and you have these different types of leaders in your organization. So, I mean, that's just one approach. That's just one approach that I mentioned in the book. And yeah, I guess it's probably just to give you one other kind of little insight into it. I explain it a bit of how do we create a almost like a startup company within an ancient company. So how do we, because one of the things I argue is that I think we're on the brink of lots of new styles of education, and not just on the brink, it's happening. The fastest growing school in the UK at the moment is an online school. And I know from my work in the United States, there's a lot of hybrid and online schooling now, and has been for a few years. So yeah, so it's and not just a replication of what's going on in the classroom online, but there's a lot of innovation going on with that, and
Well, that's,
how.
yeah. And that's what I love what you said about creative destruction, right? Like that speaks volumes right there, because status quo like isn't doing what it needs to do for all
Yeah.
kids. So we already
Yeah.
know. So you and I are very aligned here. Sorry to interrupt, but you
No,
and
no,
I
no,
are
it's good.
very aligned. I love that you infuse the word empathy, because when I rabble rouse, I want people to know that I do it with equity and care and empathy.
Yeah.
But like rabble rousing is necessary. We have a world ahead of us
Absolutely.
that we have never experienced, lived, or known.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. No, I think how we get through that is through choice. We have to lay everything out. And I think we have to do that with for our students and their parents as well, and that's what quite I suppose my career at the moment is like I go into established schools and colleges and universities and help them to do that process that you just spoke about. But also, I'm also quite excited that there are these new types of school popping up and being created, because the more choice we can give to parents, to families, to students, the better, I think. And I think we're on the brink. I don't think we're fully there yet, but I think we could be on the brink of a phenomena that's happening in other sectors, which is like decentralization. So we're seeing within finance, we have been for the last 15 years or so, a real kind of march towards decentralized finance, and it's really challenging economies all over the world at the moment, and those centralized financial systems. Same with ownership, same with, I mean, art to a certain extent. So healthcare, I know a few people who work in healthcare, and there's a big push at the moment on the innovation side of healthcare for it to become more decentralized, away from kind of the centralized hospital in a city, more to how can healthcare be brought to the person and be continuous. So yeah, so I think education is kind of on that journey of that phenomena as well. And I think this is the crux of it here. And that because of that, I think we're going to start to get competition in education where we have never really had proper competition in education. Now, you might get kind of independent schools where they might be competing against another independent school. But you look under the hood, and it's a lot of it's very similar. 99% of it is very, very similar. But I think we will start to see competition that varies drastically to what we might call school. And I think when that happens, just like it does in the business world, it forces innovation to happen. Innovation happens in the business world because of competition.
Yeah.
And I think education has almost had a special dispensation from that for a long, long time. And I think that's probably coming to an end. So I think we innovate, or we put ourselves in a really tricky position over the coming years if based on the offerings that we're providing for our students and for their families. I think it's exciting. We get to be part of almost a generation who gets to do that creative destruction and start to think about how we forge forward. But yeah, it's an interesting time, and I think we're going to be shocked by some of the AI that's going to be coming in the next few years, and that will kind of make us think, how
I,
do we do this?
and I want to get to that in a second because I know you just wrote a great Forbes piece about AGI, artificial general
Oh,
intelligence.
okay, yes.
But I'm going to get to that in just a second. I think one interesting comment that I've heard a couple times from school superintendents in the United States, for those listening in the UK, school superintendents in the US oversee districts, right? So
Yeah.
I have some superintendents on
We
the
don't we
podcast.
don't have that superintendent in the UK.
Right. So I was
Literally,
giving
anyone in the UK who hears the word superintendent just thinks of Superintendent Chalmers from The Simpsons. That's literally the only like link to that word we have.
so different, very, very different. Some really brilliant people who do incredibly hard work. Like, for context for our UK listeners, that incredibly high turnover rates because the role is so challenging, but so important here. But my point here being, I interviewed one today, and unfortunately, the episode is not going to go live till March. So a little bit of a time warp here because Dan, your episode is going live in January and this episode won't go live in March. But this leader used the words malpractice as it refers to what was possible after the pandemic, what amount of change we really should have seen in terms of restructuring schooling, but it never happened. Right. We had this opportunity, and this is like somewhat divorced of the concept of introducing AI, but really, to your point about rethinking education, she said she thought the pandemic would bring a complete restructuring of schooling to benefit children, and it never happened, to the point so far that she thinks it's malpractice, that we just went back to our old systems and our old ways and maybe tweaked a couple things here or there. And like you and like me, we all are looking for bigger change than that. We think it's possible, like, in your book, you talk about this. We think it's possible to disrupt more holistically than we are right now. So I find it really fascinating, your concept of the competition is going to lead to, you believe that competition is going to lead to that change.
I think it will eventually. I I almost don't want us to wait till that moment because it could mean that kind of what we call here state education. I think you guys call it public education, I guess. It could really lead to a sticky situation for when parents have choice. And that and I think we need to start innovating now. In fact, we should have been innovating for the last 20 years, I think, probably since the dawn of the internet, really, uh,
Yes.
because it's been on the cards since then. But yeah, it isn't. Yeah, COVID's interesting. I do mention COVID a few times in the book, and kind of, I think COVID had an end. That's why. So we always knew it was going to come to an end at some point. And so no matter what we did, we knew we didn't have to, it didn't have to be long term. Um, AI disruptions doesn't have an end. Um, and I think that's the main difference there. Plus we didn't know how to innovate. Like COVID came along and we took what we were doing in the classroom and stuck it on a Google Meet. Like,
Right. Yeah,
come
no,
on, that's
that's
not
exactly.
innovation.
You two should meet. The woman I'm talking about, her name is Shannon Cox. She's the head of not just a district, but an entire county in Ohio that's incredibly innovative. And
Okay.
it's called Montgomery County ESC. I talk about them constantly. I even brought them up to like some political figures I had on the podcast, Arnie Duncan, the former US Education Secretary, just to share the stories of what's happening in this county in Ohio because it's so incredible.
That's really
But
cool.
but I say this because the level of change that you and Shannon are advocating for and that you think is coming with the right level of conditions is important. I'm a big believer in education opportunities that are innovative and exciting and make a difference in children's lives should be equitably distributed. And I do believe you talk about this in your book that AI has the potential to do that.
Yeah, yeah, I think so. And it's interesting you just said there. I was on a panel the other day, and there was a great guy called Guy Claxon. He's a British psychologist who talks about innovating education. And he quoted, I forget who he quoted now, but the quote was essentially, the future is here already. It's just unevenly distributed. And I think we can see that. We can't like there's a school out of California, an online school called Synthesis, where it has the highest number of billionaire parents who send their kids to this online school. Um, it was born out of SpaceX. It was they they have AI tutors who teach the children, and then they work on problem solving and communication with the students in kind of these, and you wouldn't recognize it as a school. It would probably be, I think if most teachers looked at it, they'd probably see it to be almost like an extracurricular club style. That's what they would recognize it as. But actually it's a school. And some of these students are being earmarked by top companies for when they graduate. And I think once we get to that point and people start going, actually, um, these students are going into amazing opportunities from this type of education. That's when I think people will start to think actually there are other routes here.
And how can we distribute it to your point? How can we distribute it to
Ex
all, not just
yeah,
the
exactly,
billionaires' kids?
exactly, yeah, exactly. And I think that will likely come in terms of competition drives price down as well. And I think we will get big companies, whether it be Google, Microsoft, Khan Academy, or whoever it is, who will offer. I think we'll get to a point where full curriculums, full education programs will be offered for free online as well. Um, so I think I do worry though, and I don't want to give the impression that I think this is all going to be kind of rosy and amazing, because I think there's a huge possibility that a gap will continue to divide those who have and those who don't have. And I kind of compare it to I spent some time about 15 years ago in Kenya, in Africa for I was there for about 6 months, and the education system there is the state education system is very, very poor. It's very, very basic. They might be in a mud hut. with a blackboard. And anybody who has money, which is not many people at all, but even if you've got a little bit of money, you can afford some kind of higher up education. And what that means is that the money in kind of the state education is kind of non-existent. It's they don't have much at all. And so I do worry that if we do start to get these alternative forms of education, and parents who are more, for want of a better term, switched on and realize that these are the forms and maybe have a little bit of money to spend on it, it could drive a real wedge between those who even just, I mean, look at our economies at the moment. Like even those who just have a little bit of disposable income, which is not many people in this economy, just a small extra bit at the end of the month, and those who don't. And then, and I suppose a bit like what happens in the United States, it doesn't happen in the UK, but like education through voucher schemes and parents being able to choose where they spend those vouchers and so on. And it could really be a disadvantage to state education that a lot of people who don't have as much will rely on, but could start to become really underfunded more and more. I mean, there were
I
some
think that's why
figures.
we have to talk about it, right? Constantly talk
Yeah.
about it. You know, every
And
time we have the opportunity to think about, yes, we have access to these great tools, these great resources, these great schooling opportunities, but who is we have access? Is it everyone? Is it a subpopulation who can afford it or has the means and resources to know where it is? Like,
yeah.
it's important.
And also, I think we're talking about innovation of schools, but actually giving our students the tools for them to be innovative. And because, like I mentioned, I think it's in the introduction of my new book, I talk about how the means of production has changed over the centuries. So you go back to kind of the post-industrial era, somebody who could produce more wealth was likely somebody who had wealth already. They had land, they were, go back to feudal times. Then we go and get into the Industrial Revolution, and actually the key marker now land was and wealth was still important, but one of the key marker for being able to produce wealth became labor. So could you bring people together to work for you, and so on. We're now kind of in that post industrial times where actually it's entrepreneurial skills, because you don't need wealth already. I mean, you need a laptop. You don't need land. You need a table in a Starbucks. You don't necessarily need labor. You can work with AI. You can literally do the job of 10 people with AI now. And what that leaves is I suppose, the individual vision, the individual ability to solve problems, to discover solutions, to then to act, to bring something to market. It's entrepreneurial skills, and I make the argument in the book that when I talk about that, I'm not saying everyone has to become a business person or start a business, but it's the skills behind that. It's the ability to be able to identify gaps, to identify problems, and deliver solutions. And I think that's going to be the key marker. And in our schooling, I paint in very broad strokes here because I know not all schools are like this, but our schooling doesn't really do that. It's all about, right, we're going to give you some information that you need to learn. It's not about, here's a problem. Let's spend some time on figuring something out here. Let's spend a term on working with a local water company who are having droughts and are about to go out of business, and can we help them? Can we put our brains together and can we teach our students some design thinking skills to work with them? Do you know what I mean? Like, and
Oh,
that,
yes. And
and I think,
think about the level of motivation, how it increases for kids that historically aren't finding connection at school and aren't motivated by their current learning environment. I often think about my CEO and I are two very different types of learners. We actually went to the same college, but didn't know each other. And he was the type of student that just wanted to think outside the box and wanted to create and wanted to learn by doing. And I think and I didn't think I was that. I thought I was like, oh, well, I receive information, I memorize it, I output it. But I know now that actually I would have excelled even more had I had a type of learning environment where I could build and I could try and I could experiment and ask questions. So
Yeah.
I've seen models where that happens. I've seen schools where that occurs. It is not widespread here in the US. And imagine if it were. I mean, Dan, I could talk for days with you on this topic and the topic of education in general. We're not going to get to the article, or excuse me, the piece you just published in Forbes, but I will link it with this episode in my newsletter when it goes out in just about a week, so they can all read it and see what we need to do to prepare for AGI, which is coming this year in 2025. But I will direct us to our final question here, with the hope that you'll come back and we'll talk some more about more topics in the future. And that question is, what advice would you give an educator who's starting their career today?
I take what you think being a teacher is and throw it out the window, and really try to think, what do these students need me to be, and who can I be to innovate wherever I'm going to be teaching. And this is purely from my own experience. Again, it's hard to give advice to lots of different people who have lots of different ideas, but I know from my teacher training years, a lot of us kind of had that romantic idea of being a teacher, of buying the suit jacket that has the patches on the elbows, and really, I was a philosophy teacher as well, so I was very like, I want to explore philosophy, helps my students discover the questions of the big questions of life and so on. I think go into it thinking, how can I change it from within as well? What could I do? And I wrote an article actually for Forbes last year where I talked about how we need influencer teachers, not just to be influencers. But to teachers who aren't afraid to go, you know what? I'm gonna start speaking my mind and saying what I think needs to happen, and I'm gonna promote myself. I'm gonna write a book. I'm gonna work with teachers and help them, and I think we need more of that. I think we need more teachers to stand up and say, you know what, there's got to be a better way here. There's got to be a better way. Yeah, I'm not sure if that's
I love it. Take what you know about a teacher and throw it out the window. Be different, be creative, be innovative. I love that, Dan.
Yeah.
I love what you've shared here today. I adore your book. Congratulations.
Thank you.
On all the well-deserved accolades. And I just want to say thank you again for making time in your busy schedule to come join us and share your wisdom. I will link access to some of your writing as well as access to the book in our newsletter. And thank you for joining us, Dan.
Oh, Hayley, honestly, it's been my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
And thank you to everybody who tuned into this episode. Thanks for listening to the Learning Can't Wait podcast. If you like what you heard, please rate, review, and share this episode. Be the first to know when we have a new episode by subscribing wherever you listen to podcasts. If you'd like to be a guest on the show or have a suggestion for an episode, email us at podcast@fullmindlearning.com.